Over the little Arkansas town of Springdale, the morning sun dawned softly. The enormous two-story Duggar house, encircled by well-kept gardens and the gentle sounds of birds, appeared to be just as flawless as the picture it had always given the outside world. Everything was quiet, serene, and well-planned inside, the sort of morning that had characterized the Duggars for years. Michelle Duggar was already up, humming a well-known hymn as she prepared breakfast for the younger kids. The smell of pancakes and brewing coffee filled the air. Always the calm caregiver, Jana assisted her mother in setting up the daily routine, moving with elegant precision from one part of the house to another. Laughter reverberated through the spacious corridors as the smaller kids played in the living area. In the Duggar household, it appeared to be just another typical day. The father, Jim Bob Duggar, had departed early that morning. He informed Michelle he had a meeting at church and then needed to do a few business errands. There was no reason to suspect his absence. As a father, community leader, and former TV personality, he was a guy who lived his life centered on discipline, faith, and family. Jim Bob represented commitment and strength to everyone in his vicinity. Michelle gathered the family for prayer by the middle of the morning. They bent their heads, and the normally chattering home grew hushed. Millions of people had already seen this image of a family committed to God and one another on television screens. But a whole other scene was developing just a few miles away. A dark SUV was encircled by police cars in a calm parking area close to a gas station. Jim Bob Duggar sat still inside, his hands shaking, his face white. The cops spoke softly, urging him to step out. They had heard about his unpredictable behavior, and when they got to his car, they discovered evidence that made all the difference. Little packets concealed under the seat, traces of drugs no one would ever think he used. The well-known preacher of faith and discipline was handcuffed and put in the back of a police car in a matter of minutes. Reporters from the area started bringing cameras. Television screens began to display breaking news tickers with the words, "Jim Bob Duggar arrested." When the first alarm came up, Jana was at home browsing through her phone. She froze her fingers. The headline, the crime, and her father's name didn't make sense. She assumed it was a mistake, a harsh rumor. But in a matter of seconds, the same report was broadcast on all networks. Michelle became aware of the abrupt quiet in the room. Jana's eyes were fixed on the screen, and her face had gone white. The rest of the family crowded around, bewilderment spreading through the room like a storm. The bigger kids could see the horror in each other's eyes, but the younger ones had no idea what was going on. Former reality TV star Jim Bob Duggar, arrested on suspicion of drug possession and illegal substance use, was one of the breaking news bulletins that flashed on the television. The world that previously saw the Duggars as a model Christian family now watched in disbelief. Michelle sat down slowly, trying to take in what she was seeing with trembling palms. Her husband, whom she had prayed for, trusted, and supported through all the controversies, was now being handcuffed and taken into a police station. Reporters gathered outside their house, cameras flashing, questions resonating from their voices. Whispering to one another, neighbors peered out of their windows. The family's stillness deepened within. Each heartbeat sounded louder than the one before it. While Jessa and Jana exchanged nervous looks, Jana firmly grasped her mother's hand. The house that used to exude happiness suddenly felt oppressive. All of the pictures on the wall, including happy faces, family portraits, and Bible passages in gold frames, appeared to be fragments of a crumbling world. Michelle made her way to the backyard by herself as darkness fell. She eventually let her tears fall into the frigid air. She didn't know how to address the world or the church, and she didn't have any answers for her kids or words for the cameras. But in the back of her mind, one question kept creeping up. How long had this been going on, and why hadn't she anticipated it? Jim Bob sat in a dark interrogation room far away, his head lowered, his faith put to the ultimate test. For the first time in years, there were no pictures, no smiles, no prayers, simply stillness and shame. The story of the ideal family started to fall apart at that point. A long-kept secret was now revealed. The legacy of the Duggars would never be the same. As if the sky itself were in mourning, the following morning brought the sound of rain pattering softly against the Duggar house's windows before getting harder. The world was a different place overnight. The same startling headline appeared on every news outlet, social media site, and news channel. Jim Bob Duggar arrested for drug possession. With their cameras aimed at the Duggar family's fence, Reporters had set up camp outside the estate. Drones flew above the house, vans lined the road, and microphones waited in an attempt to get a sight of the once idolized family now living in shame. Inside, stillness had taken over. The normally lively breakfast table, when scripture and laughing used to fill the air, was now empty. Michelle was standing close to the sink, staring at the coffee pot that had gone cold hours earlier with a blank expression. Her body felt heavy and her mind was numb. All the sounds in the home sounded far away, like echoes from a different era. In an effort to calm the younger siblings, Jana wandered silently across the house. After gathering them in the living room and shutting off the television, she assured them that everything would be all right, although her voice wavered, indicating her anxiety. A few of the kids didn't comprehend completely. Others did, and it stung even more that they didn't speak. Now living separately from the family, Jessa and Junior were already en route home. Without being present to console their mother, they couldn't stand to see their family name dragged throughout all networks. Junior continued to play the television footage while driving, including the part where their father was being led into the police vehicle. Every repeat went deeper than the one before it. The police department called Michelle at the Duggar residence to confirm that Jim Bob was being detained overnight. The words drug-related offense repeated in her head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Her voice broke mid-sentence as she attempted to pray, murmuring words of forgiveness and faith. She questioned whether prayer was sufficient for the first time in her life. The news had left Arkansas by the afternoon. Around-the-clock coverage was being broadcast by national outlets. Interviews were conducted with former TLC producers. Old grimly edited excerpts from 19 Kids and Counting were being rerun. Critics and pundits argued about how a man who advocated discipline and purity could develop an addiction. A public catastrophe had befallen the Duggar family. Meanwhile, inside a frigid holding cell at the county jail, Jim Bob sat alone on the edge of his cot. A mixture of embarrassment and withdrawal caused his hands to shake uncontrollably. He had established a family and religious empire, but he had been engaged in a secret struggle that no one was aware of. Prescription medications for a previous back ailment was the first step. Dependency, denial, and secrecy followed. What started out as a crutch turned into a chain that pulled him into the shadows. He closed his eyes, recalling the expressions on his kids' faces and the innumerable times he had stood in front of them and spoke about faith and strength. He was internally burned by the hypocrisy. He wanted to yell and beg for forgiveness, but he was unsure of how to start. Jana was pacing her room at home. Texts, missed calls, and notifications from strangers expressing pity or insults kept vibrating on her phone. Anger boiled up inside of her. How could her father conceal such a thing? After all these years, how could he have lied to them? That night, Michelle called the family together. The rain continued to pelt outside as they gathered in the living room. Her face was pale as she stood in front of them, but her voice seemed solid. She talked softly, reminding them that they would get through this, that they had hold on to faith no matter how dark things seemed. But she was breaking on the inside. A few of the older kids started crying. Others, unable to comprehend the humiliation, gazed blankly at the ground. Once praised for their closeness, the family was now divided and only connected by suffering and uncertainty. The lights from the reporters' cameras flashed like lightning through the windows as night descended once more. The privacy of the family was lost. As if they were imaginary characters, strangers discussed their lives. Memes, satire, sympathy, and judgment were all mixed together in the brutality of social media. Michelle retreated to her bedroom, gripping her Bible closely. Every verse she read made her think of failure, not only her husband's but also her own, despite her best efforts to find solace in the pages. Her entire life had been based on image and trust, on the notion that their faith could shield them from the outside world. That delusion was now totally destroyed. Johanna, one of the younger girls, asked Jana in a whisper in a corner of the house when their father would get home. Jana was at a loss for words. Even though she knew none of them would sleep, she just gave her sister a hug and told her to do so. Simultaneously, Jim Bob and his attorney sat in the police station across town, where they discussed the charges. In the air were terms like possession, rehabilitation, and court appearance. Jim Bob nodded slowly, regret shining in his eyes. His thoughts were not on the case. Rather, they were on Michelle, his kids, and the crumbling religious empire as a result of his decisions. Reporters continued to swarm the Duggar residence the following morning. The family was unable to go outside. A pal was slinking by the cameras to carry groceries. People from the church called all the time. Some were praying, while others were passing judgment while posing as concerned. As the last nail in the coffin of their public image, TLC issued a statement by the afternoon formally separating itself from the Duggar family, calling the arrest deeply troubling. The family had lost their respect, their reputation, and the trust of everyone. The stillness between them, however, was the most painful thing. That night, for the first time in decades, there was no prayer at the dinner table. Nobody said anything. Plates were left partially consumed. There was a lot of pain, remorse, and incredulity in the air. And in that silence, something inside each of them shifted. The world no longer knew them as the Duggars. Their family was shattered, and they had to confront the reality of the guy they had previously thought was infallible. As midnight drew near, the storm outside subsided. However, the storm was only getting started inside the Duggar house. The week that followed passed in a sluggish, agonizing echo. There was an odd silence in the Duggar house, which had formerly been alive with music, laughter, and the peaceful chaos of a big family. With the same tense cadence, whispers, sobs, and the distant hum of reporters waiting outside. Each day merged into the next. Michelle Duggar didn't get much sleep. She used to spend her evenings sitting by the window, where she used to watch her kids play in the yard. She now gazed into the night, her thoughts troubled by unanswerable concerns. When had it started? What was the duration of her husband's concealment? How could she have failed to see the warning signs? Jim Bob was released under severe supervision on bond across town. Television repeatedly showed him leaving the police station, looking thinner, paler, and surrounded by flashing cameras. The once proud father who had appeared before church audiences lecturing about faith and morality was now a figure of failure. The solitude was intolerable when he got home. The younger kids, bewildered but glad to see their dad, ran to him. Uncertain whether to embrace him or insist for explanations, the elder ones hung back. Michelle stopped at the entrance, her fists clutched tightly in front of her, eyes full of grief and disbelief. It was a pointless reunion. A thick mist of guilt and distrust had taken the place of the warmth that had previously pervaded the Duggar residence. The truth started to come to light over the course of the following few days. Old prescriptions were discovered concealed in Jim Bob's office drawer. Several of the bottles were almost empty and lacked labels. Jana was cleaning when she first noticed them, and when she understood what they signified, her hands began to shake. One evening, Michelle discreetly confronted her husband in a controlled, tremulous voice. She didn't yell. She refrained from crying. She merely inquired as to how much time had passed. Words could never express what his silence did. Jim Bob had been experiencing back pain from a minor vehicle accident over 4 years prior. The doctor recommended medications, modest ones at first, just enough to let him sleep. However, the dosage rose as the months went by. He also discovered alternative ways to obtain more prescriptions after they ran out. It was about the discomfort at first. The pressure to be flawless, to have a large family, and to uphold the immaculate image that the world demanded of him then became the main focus. The burden on his shoulders increased each time a fresh crisis engulfed the Duggars, a child rebelled, or the media probed farther into their personal lives. The drugs so became his means of escape. To feel numb for a few hours, he would take them late at night while everyone was asleep. Eventually, things spiraled beyond his control. Behind the grin and the well-chosen phrases he spoke in public, the addiction silently overtook him. What little strength the family still had was broken as the truth was revealed. Unable to understand how the guy she had always admired had turned into a stranger, Jana spent hours locking herself in her room. Jessa sobbed aloud, feeling resentful of herself for not perceiving it as well as her father. Jana withdrew, shutting off her phone, avoiding the internet, terrified to read the relentless criticism from strangers. The house turned into a battleground for feelings such as rage, embarrassment, denial, and grief. Michelle's own heart was aching, but she made an effort to keep everyone together. She was unable to resist reliving the past, noticing how many sermons, interviews, and family photos were based on false information. All along, the man she had prayed with each morning, and who she considered to be the cornerstone of their faith, had been engaged in a covert conflict. At church, rumors started to circulate. Some members offered prayers, others provided judgment. Attendance declined. In the grocery store, the same individuals who had previously praised the Duggar family now avoided making eye contact and pretended not to recognize Michelle. Everywhere the kids went, the sense of shame was there. When strangers passed by, they whispered. Online, ex-fans left irate comments. Cruelty had replaced what had been admiration. Jim Bob, on the other hand, had to go to required therapy sessions. His attorney made arrangements for him to enroll in a private, faith-based rehabilitation program. He requested a final visit from his family before departing. The gathering was silent and weighed down by unsaid feelings. Michelle stood beside him, her face expressionless but her eyes flaming. She really wanted to forgive him, but it didn't make the betrayal go away. It didn't take away the hurt of witnessing their whole life disintegrate due to secrets he kept. He stopped at the door while packing his luggage to glance back at his family, the kids who used to think he was a hero but were now too hurt to look him in the eye. Without saying another word, he walked out, the sound of the door closing reverberating throughout the home like a last confession. The next few weeks were the most difficult the Duggars had ever experienced. The house felt empty but somehow more at ease without Jim Bob. Michelle found herself taking care of everything, including food planning, bill payment, and soothing her kids while attempting to keep them safe from the outside commotion. Jana took over a lot of her father's duties, including looking after her younger siblings and maintaining the little peace that was left. However, she concealed her own suffering beneath a well-practiced smile. She discovered a recording from years ago, a Christmas special in which Jim Bob spoke strength and thankfulness, one evening while going through old family videos. Her heart ached as she saw his beaming smile on the screen. Long before any of them noticed, she knew that he had been drifting away behind that smile. Jana stood in the dim moonlight on the porch that night as the rest of the family slept. Her thoughts were loud, yet the outside world was silent once more. She questioned whether their family would ever be complete again, or if they would always be plagued by the mistakes of a man. Jim Bob sat in his rehabilitation room, miles away, gazing at the wall-mounted cross. For the first time in weeks, his hands remained firm. He prayed in a whisper, asking for the courage to confront the reality he had long suppressed, not for pardon. Two hearts, one shattered by guilt and the other by betrayal. Each sought salvation in their own unique ways during that precarious moment. The Duggars had been abandoned by the world. Even so, a glimmer of hope remained in the ashes of their faith. If they could only find each other again, they might be able to rebuild. The Duggar residence had turned into a stronghold of quiet. Cameras and microphones no longer swarmed the grass, but the weight of the outside world remained felt. Every notification on social media was a new jab. Articles analyzing Jim Bob's addiction, fan conjecture, critical tweets from strangers, and even old supporters casting doubt on Michelle's parenting and leadership. The family moved like ghosts inside. Footsteps were tentative, meals were silent. There was no longer any of the natural laughter. Each member fought with a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, rage, sadness, guilt, and the faint glimmer of residual love for the guy who had led them into this abyss. As usual, Jana made an effort to keep everything together. She managed homework, planned meals, and took countless calls from anxious friends and family. However, she was unable to protect the family from the hidden reality. The elder kids were huddled in the living room one evening, whispering to each other. It was no longer possible to disregard their questions. What was the duration of this? What was the reason behind Jim Bob's prolonged concealment? How could a disciplined and devout guy have fallen so far? Michelle walked in, exhausted but determined. Weeks of restless nights, tears, and unceasing anxiety were etched on her face. She told them to remain calm and that they would deal with this together, but she was feeling the same powerless anger that was about to overwhelm her. The altercation started quietly. Under the direction of Jessa and Jana, the older kids recounted what they had learned on their own. Whispered rumors, secret prescriptions, and times that they now understood had been calls for assistance disguised as typical behavior. Every revelation was a fragment of reality that broke through the illusionary barrier that had previously protected them. When the youngest teenagers posed questions that no one could honestly answer without suffering, the discussion became heated. They were curious as to why their father, who had taught them discipline and integrity, had kept his addiction a secret. For what reason had he placed the family in this predicament? When Michelle talked about her personal sense of betrayal, her voice broke. She acknowledged that she had made an effort to appreciate the positive aspects of her marriage and to have faith in him, but that faith had prevented her from seeing the warning flags. The audience was filled with tears, grief, and a collective sense of shame as a result of her revelation. The younger kids silently listened while they talked, attempting to understand the parents' suffering. Their youthful innocence and the harsh realities of addiction, secrets, and public scrutiny collided painfully. Jim Bob was in treatment at the time, dealing with the severe repercussions of his behavior. The days dragged on with an intolerable weight, the nights were sleepless, and withdrawal was cruel. But every session made him face the man he had become, the husband he had let down, the parent he had failed to protect, the image he had damaged. At home, media attention grew more intense. Every public appearance was suddenly put in a new perspective, one of deceit, hypocrisy, and scandal, and reporters combed through past interviews and films. The Duggars' private lives were destroyed, their family life was turned into a show, and they became the subject of national controversy. Despite her apprehension, Jana made the decision to contact her father. Through his attorney, she arranged calls, wrote letters, and begged for openness. For the first time in years, Jim Bob, weak but resolute, started to react slowly, cautiously, and honestly. With every communication, more of the reality emerged, including the agony on the body, the stress on the mind, and the oppressive pressure to be flawless. He acknowledged that he had been silent out of fear of being judged, and that, despite destroying his family's reputation, he had wished to preserve it. Small steps were taken by the family to process his confession. Some days were more subdued and characterized by hesitant forgiveness. Other days were blazing, filled with tears and rage. There were no shortcuts. Trust had to be restored piece by piece. Michelle wrestled with her religion. Instead of asking for miracles, she prayed for strength. The ability to forgive, to mentor her children, and to stand up in front of the public while still standing by her family. As emotions raged like hurricanes, Jana and Jessa were the household's pillars, holding it together. The world outside kept watching. The headlines changed from instant indignation to solemn contemplation. The family's ability to rehabilitate was questioned by former fans. While devoted supporters provided silent support, detractors awaited another slip-up. It was quieter than ever inside the Duggar house. However, something delicate started to develop in that silence. Consciousness, comprehension, and the first signs of recovery. Every member had to face their own reality, which included not only Jim Bob's errors, but also their own emotions of betrayal, fear, and despair. Although the cracks were deep, they realized for the first time that light could enter through them. There was also a cautious sense of hope in the air as night fell over the home again. It was shaky and uncertain, but it was definitely there. The world will never view the Duggar family the same way again since they were no longer flawless. However, they had started to face reality and possibly start to heal inside the shattered walls of their house. The arrest that rocked the Duggar family had been months ago. Within the household, life had started to settle into a precarious rhythm, but the once perfect image that had been transmitted to millions of spectators now lay in ruins. The healing process had started, but it was uneven, slow, and frequently unpleasant. Jim Bob Duggar had finished his first course of treatment. He had to face the repercussions of his conduct every day while in rehabilitation, including the years of secret, the betrayed trust, and the public humiliation he would never be able to overcome. However, he was confronting reality with integrity and responsibility for the first time in years. He wasn't the untouchable patriarch of the past when he got home. The seriousness of what he had done had made him leaner, quieter, and more humble. The kids kept a close eye on him, wondering if their father would ever earn back their confidence. Michelle greeted him at the door with a look of caution, grief, and a glimmer of hope. The initial days were hesitant. Long silences were interspersed with awkward conversations. Sensing his weakness, the younger kids immediately clutched to him. The elder kids, especially Jana and Jessa, watched in silence, taking note of every word, every gesture, and every indication that their father had really changed. Jim Bob opened up gradually. He talked about the hardships that had driven him to become addicted, including the agony, stress, and terror that had overcome him. He only asked to be there and honest, not to be forgiven. The family then spoke up about their own suffering, including the betrayal, the hurt, and the embarrassment they had concealed from the public. For the first time, there was real communication, the type that could mend wounds that had festered in quiet for years, despite the tears and voices that were exchanged. Always the anchor, Michelle led the discussions with forbearance and courage. Although she was not afraid to face the past, she also urged her family to recognize that there was hope for the future. She reminded them that faith was about forgiving others, being resilient, and being willing to start over, not about being flawless. Simple meals, peaceful evenings spent reading scripture, and garden walks were among the family activities that Jana arranged and which had previously brought them together. These little customs served as the binding agent, providing consolation and normalcy for a while. The world's scrutiny persisted outside the Duggar residence. Although it slowed, media coverage persisted. The family decided to keep their response to a minimum and concentrate on their personal recovery. They learned to use social media carefully, allowing time and deeds to speak louder than words, even though it was still a double-edged sword. Jim Bob resumed his full involvement in family life, but in a new way. He accepted responsibility for his errors, let his kids express themselves freely, and listened more than he talked. His acts of humility gradually restored the brittle trust that could never be restored by words alone. Despite their caution, the older kids started showing forgiveness in tiny ways, such as via kind deeds, mutual prayers, and epiphanies. In order to fill in the gaps left by the years of secret, the younger children, who were more naive and unaware of the severity of the scandal, gave their father unconditional affection. The Duggar family came out of the year with a fresh perspective on both themselves and one another. The impenetrable family of television stardom has changed. They struggled and had flaws, but they were human. Even though they had endured the worst of both private and public humiliation, they managed to survive. The family got together for a silent prayer session in the living room one evening. Emotion permeated the room, and their faces were softly shadowed by the faint light of the lamps. They offered their prayers for direction, fortitude, and ongoing recovery. They begged for forgiveness for each other as well as for God. The Duggar family learned in that silent room, amid sobs and whispers, that family ties could withstand betrayal and darkness if they were fostered with honesty, patience, and love. This truth was greater than celebrity, shame, and the mistakes of one person. The cameras would never come back. Eventually, the headlines would fade. With time, the world's judgment would become more lenient. However, the Duggar family had discovered something enduring: the seeds of repentance and a brittle but tenacious hope. Yes, they had fallen, but they were learning how to get back up. As a real family, flawed, challenged, and slowly, miraculously whole again, not as the perfect family the world previously envisioned. And a calm descended upon their Arkansas house as night fell. A new day had emerged after the storm had passed. The Duggars left behind a legacy of survival, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of family rather than perfection.